So imagine you're a Formula One team and you just designed the most powerful race car in history. Faster, more advanced, unbeatable. The problem? Your competition's trying to get their hands on the technology. And if they get their hands on it, they're going to use it to crush you. So you lock it down. You ban sales, you control parts, you do everything you can to make sure no one outside your team gets that technology. But then weeks later, you're in a race, and somehow your rival's not only competing, but performing beyond expectations with tech that looks like yours. They didn't steal it from your garage. They didn't hack your systems. Instead, they found a way around the rules. They used middlemen, fake paperwork, and third-party suppliers to smuggle the technology right from under you. Now replace the race car with the world's most powerful AI chips, and replace that rival with unknown buyers helping adversary nations violate the law. And that's what's just happened. You see, in March of 2025, Singaporean authorities arrested 3 men for orchestrating a $390 million fraud scheme to illegally obtain US-made AI servers packed with cutting-edge NVIDIA chips. The plan? To quietly reroute them to Malaysia, potentially serving as a stop before maybe heading to another location. And this isn't just an isolated case. Around the same time, US officials launched an investigation into DeepSeek, a Chinese AI firm suspected of somehow acquiring restricted NVIDIA AI chips despite US export controls. Now, while these two cases haven't been directly linked, they expose the same uncomfortable reality. America's most powerful AI technology is slipping through the cracks. So how did these fraudsters pull off this high-tech smuggling operation? What does it tell us about the global AI arms race? And more importantly, are US export controls effective? If so, and they're not stopping this, what can the US do next? Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Midweek Sitrep, your weekly briefing on national security law and policy. My name is Jerry Fowler, and I'm your host. Each week I break down what you need to know and what you might have missed in the world of national security and business, all in under 20 minutes, so you can stay mission focused. Before we do a deep dive on AI chips and export controls, let's discuss what we should be monitoring in the world of national security this week. Presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are discussing a possible peace deal, which could involve recognizing Crimea as a Russian territory. NATO allies aren't convinced and are ramping up defense spending. Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia plan to withdraw from the NATO treaty banning landmines, citing increased threats from Russia. House China Committee Chair insists ByteDance must fully divest from TikTok, challenging the White House's rumored plan to let Oracle take over U.S. operations. With federal cybersecurity job cuts, states like New York and Pennsylvania are aggressively hiring former federal employees to strengthen their cyber defenses. The former director of the CHIPS Program Office warns that repealing the CHIPS Act would harm U.S. security, but critics, including President Trump, argue tariffs are a better approach. Companies like Google and OpenAI are urging the Trump administration to ease AI export restrictions, saying tighter rules could hurt U.S. innovation. Stay ahead by monitoring how these stories evolve. Now, let's get into AI chips and export controls. To understand why the Singaporean case matters, you first have to understand just how valuable AI chips are. These aren't just fancy processors. They are the engines that power the world's most advanced artificial intelligence. So going back to Formula One, think of the AI chips as the engines of the race cars. Regular processors are like basic commuter cars. They're fine for everyday tasks. But AI chips? They're the high-performance race cars, engineered for extreme speed and power. They train and run on the most advanced AI models, which means whoever has the best chips has the best AI. Now you may be wondering, why is the US keeping these chips from China? Well, the US has many reasons, but let's briefly cover 3. The first, military applications. You see, these chips process massive data sets faster than anything else, making them essential for autonomous drones, surveillance systems, and military AI-driven decision-making. The second is economic dominance. AI is not just another technological tool. It's a strategic asset. The country that leads in AI could dictate global markets, supply chains, and even future military capabilities. The third, there's an AI race going on. It's a race for dominance, and the US doesn't want to let China or any other adversary take the lead. And that's why Washington's been fighting to keep these chips away from China. But as we've seen, those efforts aren't exactly airtight. So the US knows AI chips are a game changer. They don't want these powerful processors ending up in the wrong hands. But how do they actually stop that from happening? Well, it all comes down to export controls, a set of rules designed to keep cutting-edge technology out of adversarial hands. The agency enforcing those rules? Well, that's the Bureau of Industry and Security, or BIS. So, in practice, if a US company wanted to sell AI chips, they can't just take the money and ship the order. These chips are classified under US export law, meaning they're subject to strict controls. So, export control law and policy is highly technical and way too complicated to give a comprehensive deep dive in less than 20 minutes in one episode. So here's some basic information for those listeners without a particular background here. BIS controls dual-use items. This means the item has both civilian and military applications. So the goods, software, and technology can be used for commercial purposes, but also has the potential for military proliferation or national security risk. Each item receives an export control classification number, or an ECCN, which is a 5-character alphanumeric code used to classify items under what's called the U.S. Export Administration Regulations, or EAR. Think of an ECCN as the item's export passport. It determines where it can and can't go. Now, it's important to note that while BIS and the US can unilaterally place controls on technology, that's usually the last resort. For many reasons, the US prefers working multilaterally with allied nations to set controls, such as participation in the Wassenaar Arrangement. Okay, I know that's a lot, and I hope you're still with me. So let's get back to AI chips. So AI chips are given certain ECCNs that require a license to export to certain countries, including China. And these restrictions are designed to prevent advanced AI from being used in military applications, surveillance, or cyber warfare. So it kind of sounds simple, right? You just deny exports to the wrong buyers. But here's the catch. The government isn't watching every transaction in real time. Companies have to police themselves. So who watches the buyers? This is where things get tricky. If a company wants to sell AI chips internationally, they have to check who they're selling it to. It's the company's job to verify whether a buyer is legitimate, ensure the chips won't be resold to a restricted entity, and stop sales if something looks suspicious. So here's some things that companies must do before exporting AI chips. You have to verify the buyer. Is the company real or just a front for illegitimate purposes? Check restricted party list. Is the customer linked to a government known for surveillance or hacking? And you have to ensure there's no diversion risk. Could the chips be secretly shipped to an unauthorized country? Similar to what we saw in the Singaporean case earlier. But due to soaring demand for AI technology, those wishing to break the law are constantly evolving their tactics. They're exploiting loopholes, using intermediaries, and setting up complex networks to obtain restricted technology. That's why businesses must take an active approach to compliance, staying ahead of those looking to circumvent the rules. At least that's what the US government expects. And if you fail to take an active approach, you might find yourself in an enforcement action and featured in BIS's publication, Don't Let This Happen to You. So we've talked about the importance of AI chips. why the U.S. wants to control them, and the responsibility businesses have in keeping them secure. But if these export controls are in place and businesses are doing their job, then why do we keep seeing stories of AI chips slipping through the cracks? Well, the answer is smugglers are getting smarter, and the black market for AI technology is booming. And they're using multiple ways to get their hands on restricted technology. Let's talk about a couple of them. The first, the front company scam. This is what we saw in the Singapore case. Fraudulent companies purchase AI chips with clean paperwork, pass compliance checks, and then quietly reroute them to restricted buyers. But we're not talking about just random small-time criminals. These operations are often backed by organized networks with ties to military and intelligence programs. The other one we'll talk about is the gray market. That's where AI chips that were originally sold legally somehow end up in restricted hands. Sometimes it's through third-party resellers. Sometimes it's theft. And sometimes it's even insiders selling to the highest bidder. Export controls aren't just a set of rules on paper. They're a constant race to stay ahead of evolving threats. The US isn't just blocking direct AI chip sales. It's in a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole, trying to shut down loopholes before adversaries find new ways to exploit them. So by now, you might be thinking, AI export controls sound like a big deal for governments and tech companies. But why should the average person care? What does this mean for the economy, for businesses, or even me? Well, for businesses, compliance isn't just about following the law. It's a serious financial decision. AI chip manufacturers and even startups working with advanced AI models now have to factor in legal reviews, risk assessments, and government oversight before selling internationally. So what's that compliance burden? Well, AI companies must navigate complex licensing rules before selling technology overseas. And startups face extra legal costs just to ensure they're not violating export laws. And if they look for investment, well, now they have CFIUS considerations. And in each scenario, if they get it wrong, the consequences can be massive. Ignoring AI export controls isn't just a slap on the wrist. It can mean multi-million-dollar fines, criminal charges, and blacklisting from the industry. So if you're a business leader, compliance isn't just a legal requirement. It's a survival strategy. So why should this matter for you, the listener? This isn't just a story about corporations and government agencies. AI chips power the technology you use every day. Think about it. Your smartphone, your laptop, cloud services, streaming services, your car, your workplace tools. The same AI chips that the US is trying to control isn't just in high-tech labs. They're in your hands, your home, your daily life. And if the wrong players gain access to the most advanced chips, the impact extends far beyond geopolitics. It could change the way technology evolves and who controls it. But let's look at the bigger picture. Beyond personal tech, AI export controls shape the global economy and the future of AI innovation. Striking the right balance is tricky. If restrictions are too loose, adversaries could outpace the US. But if they're too strict, American companies may lose their competitive edge. So for businesses, compliance is costly, but failing to comply is even worse. For the economy, AI controls impact global trade, investment, and tech dominance. And for you, the chips that power your life today could shape who controls the future of AI tomorrow. So the question isn't just whether AI export controls work. It's whether they're being enforced fast enough to matter. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that export controls are never set in stone. They evolve as technology advances, as adversaries find new workarounds, and as global power struggles shift. The AI arms race is far from over. So what's next? Right now, the US restricts AI hardware sales to certain countries, but the rules aren't airtight. AI chip makers can still sell slightly downgraded versions of their products abroad, and cloud computing remains a major loophole. You can expect the Trump administration to make this a priority. One of the biggest challenges in enforcing AI export controls is that the US isn't the only player in the game. Other countries, especially those with advanced semiconductor industries, need to be on the same page. Otherwise, export controls won't work. As for the future of enforcement, under the Biden administration, we saw a major ramp up in BIS enforcement actions, with record fines and criminal charges for companies caught violating export control laws. But what happens now? Well, the Trump administration has made it clear that companies are expected to maintain compliance programs to ensure export controls are being followed. And if not, you should expect to be fined. Expect enforcement actions to not only continue, but to increase in severity. Lastly, we've discussed the Singapore case throughout this episode, but it's just the beginning. We're going to revisit it and the DeepSeek investigation in future episodes as more information becomes available. So by now, you should realize that AI export controls aren't just about technology. They're about power. They're about who leads the world in artificial intelligence and whether the US can stay ahead in an era where algorithms, not armies, may decide the balance of power. So the real question isn't whether export controls work. It's whether they can evolve fast enough to keep up with the AI itself. Well, that's it for today's Midweek Sitrep. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share, and stay engaged. And while you're at it, stop by our store and pick up some merch. Link in the description and on our socials. I'm Jerry Fowler, and remember, everything is national security. See you next time. The information provided in this podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. Listeners should consult with a qualified professional before making any decision based on the content discussed. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency, the U.S. military, or any employer, organization, or entity with which we are affiliated. Mention of a company, product, or service in this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. Any references are for information purposes only. This podcast does not disclose any classified, proprietary, or confidential information. Discussions are based on publicly available information and personal expertise.